The first time I realized what it was costing me, she was standing too close, her voice low, her hand resting where it absolutely shouldn't have been. The room felt charged, dangerous in a way that didn't announce itself. No one else noticed. That was part of the problem. "We can't," she whispered, not pulling away. I nodded, because it was the correct response, the safe one. My body didn't agree. Neither did the silence between us. It stretched, thick with everything we were pretending not to feel. I remember thinking how strange it was that desire doesn't ask permission. It doesn't respect lines drawn for good reasons. It just waits for proximity. When I stepped back, it wasn't relief I felt. It was loss, immediate and sharp. Not of her, not yet, but of the version of myself that still believed some choices could be felt without consequence. Because even then, standing there doing the right thing, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. Whatever this was, touching it once had already changed me, and the cost had only just begun to surface. Before her, my life was arranged around balance. Not happiness exactly, but order. I was part of a long-term relationship that had grown steady with time. Shared routines, shared history, a mutual understanding that comfort was something you protected. We functioned well together. That counted for something. I told myself it counted for enough. I wasn't looking for disruption. I avoided situations that hinted at it. I believed sincerely that attraction was something you managed, not something that happened to you. That belief had served me well. Until it didn't. She entered my life through proximity, not intention. Part of the same circle. The kind of person you're expected to be cordial with. Nothing more. From the beginning, there were rules. Unspoken, but absolute. Lines that didn't need explaining because everyone understood them. Including us. At first, there was nothing to justify concern. Conversations stayed light. Jokes stayed public. If I noticed her, it was in passing. If she noticed me, she never showed it. We were careful in the way adults are careful when they have something to lose. What changed wasn't a moment. It was accumulation. I started recognizing her patterns before I meant to. The way she paused before answering certain questions. How she listened with her whole body, not just her face. The fact that she noticed things others overlooked and remembered them. These weren't seductive traits. They were intimate ones. That should have been my warning. We never crossed a line in front of others. The tension lived in glances held a second too long, in conversations that resumed exactly where they'd left off days earlier. I became aware of how often I looked for her without realizing I was doing it. How my mood shifted when she entered a room. At home, nothing had changed on the surface. Dinners, conversations, shared plans. But I felt the difference internally. A quiet distraction. A pull I didn't discuss because naming it would give it weight. I told myself it was temporary, harmless, that it said nothing about who I was. The truth was harder. I wasn't dissatisfied with my life. I was vulnerable to contrast, to the way she made me feel alert, present, seen in a way that had nothing to do with novelty and everything to do with attention. I began editing myself around her, then resenting the effort. I noticed how careful we were not to touch, and how aware I was of the absence of it. How even neutral moments carried an undercurrent that didn't belong there. I knew she felt it too. You can tell when restraint is mutual. It has a gravity of its own. I told myself that wanting wasn't choosing. That desire alone didn't make me guilty. That as long as I stayed within the lines, no harm was done. But the problem with lines is that once you start measuring your distance from them, you're already closer than you admit. By the time I understood that, The balance I'd built my life on had begun to tilt, quietly, irreversibly, and the person I couldn't want was already closer to me than anyone had a right to be. The line didn't break all at once. It thinned. It happened late, after everyone else had left. The kind of evening that carries its own permission, lights dimmed, voices gone, the sense that the world has narrowed. We were supposed to be finishing a conversation that had already gone on too long. Instead, we stood there, neither of us moving to leave. She said my name once, not urgently, just to see how it sounded in the space between us. "That's dangerous," I said, trying to keep it light. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "So is pretending this isn't happening?" That was the first time either of us acknowledged it out loud. Not desire. This, the shared awareness that restraint had stopped being neutral and started becoming effort. I should have ended it there. I knew that. I even stepped back, creating distance I'd been rehearsing for weeks. She watched me do it, her expression unreadable. "Tell me to stop," she said. The request wasn't dramatic. It wasn't seductive. It was honest. And that made it harder. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. That silence was the incident. Not the touch that followed, not even the kiss, though there was one, brief and unguarded, enough to make everything else real. The true crossing happened in the moment I failed to speak. When her hand found my arm, it felt inevitable, like something that had been waiting patiently for permission I hadn't explicitly given. I pulled back almost immediately. Breath uneven. Heart loud. "This can't happen," I said. Too late to be preventative, just in time to make it complicated. She nodded. She always did when things were difficult. That nod carried understanding, not relief. "I know," she said, "but now it already has." We didn't go further. That mattered. But not in the way I wanted it to. Because stopping didn't erase what had been revealed. It only confirmed how close we'd come to choosing differently. We stood there after, inches apart, the weight of what we'd nearly done pressing down harder than if we'd finished it. I could feel the cost taking shape, not as guilt yet, but as inevitability. She stepped away first, composed, controlled, the same discipline we'd both relied on, now strained. "Nothing changes," I said, needing to believe it. She looked at me then. Really looked. "That's the lie," she replied quietly. She left without another word. I stayed behind, aware that something essential had shifted. The line still existed, but it no longer felt solid. It felt temporary, conditional. And for the first time, I understood that not crossing it again would require more than restraint. It would require loss, and I wasn't sure which loss would be greater anymore. After that night, everything tightened. We went back to behaving correctly. Too correctly. Conversations stayed brief. Eye contact became managed. We stood farther apart than necessary, as if distance could repair what awareness had already damaged. On the surface, it worked. No one noticed anything different. That invisibility made it worse. What changed was internal. Every interaction carried an echo of what we now knew. Neutral moments weren't neutral anymore. Silence had texture. Passing her in a hallway felt deliberate, like a test we hadn't agreed to take. I caught myself replaying the sound of my name in her voice, not because it had been seductive, but because it had been unguarded. I hated how easily that memory surfaced. I hated how much I wanted to protect it. She didn't reach out. Neither did I. That restraint felt virtuous for about a week. After that, it started to feel like denial. When we did have to be in the same space, the air changed. Conversations with others blurred at the edges. I was hyper-aware of her presence without looking at her, of when she shifted her weight, of when she laughed, not loudly, but genuinely, and how my attention betrayed me every time. One afternoon, she stopped me as I was leaving. Not dramatically, just a quiet, "Wait." We stood near a window, the light flattening everything. She looked tired. Not physically, emotionally. "This is getting harder, not easier," she said. I nodded. That honesty cost me more than an argument would have. "We can fix it," I said, "by keeping distance." She studied me for a moment. "That's not fixing it," she replied. "That's postponing it." She was right, and we both knew it. The escalation wasn't about proximity anymore. It was about pressure, about how much effort it took to maintain a version of ourselves that no longer felt accurate. At home, I became restless. I noticed the gaps in my relationship more sharply, not because they were new, but because contrast had sharpened my awareness. Ordinary disagreements felt heavier. Affection felt routine, in a way it hadn't bothered me before. I hated myself for noticing. I started asking questions I'd avoided for years. About loyalty, about honesty, about whether doing the right thing automatically meant doing the truest one. Those questions didn't have clean answers, and they followed me everywhere. She, meanwhile, became more composed, quieter, as if she were already practicing absence. That scared me more than if she'd pushed. The next time we were alone, it wasn't planned. Just circumstance again. Insisting. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. "I'm trying to let this go," she said. "But I need to know if I'm doing it alone." That was the moment the weight shifted fully onto me. Until then, I'd told myself restraint was shared, mutual, safe. But her question exposed the imbalance. I could step back and let time erase this, slowly and cleanly. Or I could admit that I wasn't just managing temptation. I was actively choosing to stay near it. I didn't answer her right away. I couldn't. Because either response would cost something real. She waited. That patience wasn't generous. It was definitive. "I don't want to be the thing that almost happened," she said quietly. "I've done that before." Something in me cracked. Not open, but compromised. I saw the future branching. One path led back to stability, to order, to a life that looked correct from the outside. The other led somewhere undefined, but honest in a way I'd been avoiding. And I realized the escalation wasn't about desire anymore. It was about consequence. Whatever I chose next wouldn't just determine what happened between us. It would decide who paid the price and who lived with the knowledge of having avoided it. The decision came faster than I expected, but only because the pressure had already done its work. We were alone again, not by design, not by invitation, just circumstance repeating itself as if daring us to finally acknowledge it. She stood by the door this time, coat already on, keys in her hand. Prepared, guarded. "I can't keep doing this," she said. "No accusation, just fact. I either step away completely, or we stop pretending." I felt the weight of everything I'd been protecting press in at once. My relationship, my image of myself, the careful structure I'd built around responsibility and restraint. All of it depended on one final act of avoidance. I could still choose safety. I looked at her and saw what that choice would cost her. Not drama, not collapse, just the quiet confirmation that she'd been right to doubt me. That's when I understood the true price. "If you walk out that door," I said, my voice low, controlled, "I won't follow you, and I won't reach out. I'll do the right thing." She didn't move, didn't speak. "But," I continued, because stopping there would have been another lie, "I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I chose comfort over truth." The room held its breath. I crossed the space between us, slowly, deliberately. I stopped just short of touching her, forcing the decision into the open where it couldn't hide behind impulse. "I don't know how this ends," I said. "I only know that not choosing you is already costing me more than choosing you ever could." Her composure finally slipped, not into tears, not into relief, but into recognition. She set her keys down on the table. The sound was soft, final. "That choice costs people," she said quietly. "I know," I replied, "including me." She searched my face one last time, looking for hesitation. I didn't give it to her. When she stepped closer, it wasn't reckless. It was resolved. Our foreheads touched, breath shared, the space between us gone not by accident, but by decision. The kiss that followed was restrained, almost solemn, not hungry, not hurried. A confirmation, not an escape. In that moment, a door closed behind me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I felt it, the loss of the life that had depended on me never crossing that line again. The future rearranging itself without asking permission. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her hand against my chest, right where my heart wouldn't slow down. "This changes everything," she said. "Yes," I answered. I didn't say for the better. I didn't say for the worse. Because the truth was simpler, heavier, and irreversible. That choice cost, and I had just agreed to pay it. The aftermath wasn't dramatic. It was quieter than that, and heavier. Nothing collapsed immediately. No scenes, no public consequences. Life kept moving, indifferent to the shift that had just occurred inside me. That was the hardest part. I still woke up in the same bed, still answered the same messages, still moved through my days wearing a version of myself that no longer fit cleanly. What changed was internal alignment. I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, not because of what we'd done, but because of what I'd admitted to myself. I could no longer pretend I was only reacting. I had chosen. With her, things were careful, intentional. We didn't romanticize the situation or pretend it was simple. There was no illusion of rescue or escape. What we shared carried weight, because it acknowledged the cost from the start. Every moment together was measured against what it displaced. That awareness didn't kill the intimacy. It sharpened it. At home, the distance grew, not suddenly, but unmistakably. Conversations felt misaligned. Touch felt habitual rather than connective. I became aware of how long I'd been living on maintenance rather than truth. That realization hurt more than guilt ever could. Eventually, consequences arrived the way they always do, not as punishment, but as necessity. Choices demand coherence. Lives reorganize themselves around what's no longer sustainable. I won't pretend that process was clean. It wasn't. People were hurt. I was one of them. She never asked me to justify what I'd done. That was her quiet integrity. She understood that owning a choice means living with its aftermath, not narrating it into something noble. Sometimes I think about that first moment, the awareness, the restraint, the lie I told myself that wanting wasn't choosing. I understand now how wrong that was. Wanting is where choices begin. Avoiding them is still a form of decision. I didn't come out of this innocent. I didn't come out untouched. But I came out honest in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be before. That choice cost stability. It cost certainty. It cost the comfort of believing I was a person who always did the right thing. What it gave me instead was alignment. And once you've lived on the right side of your own truth, even briefly, you don't forget the feeling. You just learn what it took to get there.